Naomi's place, East Franklin Street, Richmond, Virginia. He stirred restlessly as images took shape in his mind, fragments forming with such clarity that he believed what he was witnessing was actually taking place. Lost in this dream world, he was completely unaware of Naomi leaning over him, one hand pressed against his temple, eyes staring at him with such intensity that they seemed to bore deep down into his very soul while he slept. Totally oblivious to the fact that the woman was picturing exactly what he was seeing, Mulder became aware that he was in a cold, dark place surrounded by stone walls. Perhaps it was a secret vault somewhere underground. His partner Scully was beside him, and they were browsing through a folder, one of many in fact, that were being kept in rows and rows of filing cabinets, which seemed to stretch into infinity. The document appeared to be full of medical reports, and a tissue sample had been attached to it in a little plastic container. Feeling a sense of déjà vu, the words Operation Paperclip came to mind, and now he knew where he was. The Strughold Mining Company in West Virginia, and this was his sister's file that Scully was holding, containing smallpox vaccination records. The scene altered, and now they were in a greenhouse talking to Victor Klemper, the Nazi scientist who had come to the USA after World War II. He was explaining to Mulder how during the Cold War his father helped gather genetic data for post-apocalyptic identification, which was to work on alien-human hybrids. Then, in the blink of an eye, he was back inside the disused mine, peeling off a label on the folder, only to discover to his horror that his own name had been typed underneath Samantha's, revealing that this file had clearly been meant for him. Still not aware that he was only dreaming of these past events, Mulder actually believed he was experiencing each one all over again, including the fear of knowing he had originally been the shadow government's sacrificial lamb. He had been the original choice to be handed over to the extraterrestrial beings. Now, as the nightmare continued to play out, he was in their family home in Chilmark, Massachusetts, a terrified young boy pleading with his father Bill to change his mind.
"Daddy, I'm scared. Don't make me go with the gray man. Daddy, please," he yelled.
"One of you has to go," Bill Mulder stated, holding his son close to his chest as tears rolled down his cheeks. "Fox, I'm truly sorry. Oh, God, I don't want to do this, but I have no choice," he admitted. Away, he was completely helpless. The consortium had painfully agreed to let the aliens take one child from each of their families, with the promise that they would be saved from the apocalypse by becoming alien-human hybrid creations. Yet they had absolutely no evidence to prove these beings were telling the truth, only their say-so, which wasn't exactly comforting.
"Then take her, not me!"
Mulder screamed, pulling away from his father's embrace.
"Please, Daddy," he begged. "Take Sam!"
He awoke in a cold sweat, breathing heavily, his body shaking violently, to discover he was alone, dressed in shirt and pants, barefoot and lying on top of the double bed in Naomi's condo. As the nightmare visions began to fade, he remembered telling Scully how perhaps a dream may be a question that we haven't yet figured out how to ask, and confusion took hold once more. Allowing that profound statement to echo in his mind made him think that perhaps the last part of the nightmare had been another memory, locked so deep inside his subconscious that he'd never even been aware of it until now, that is. But how could he have said those horrible things? He loved his sister Sam, and surely wouldn't have wanted any harm to come to her. Rolling over into a fetal position, arms wrapped around himself and knees tucked under his chin, he began to shake his head. "No, dear God, it can't. It just can't be fucking true. It just can't," he stammered over and over, hot tears now falling down his cheeks onto the pillow. As he continued to sob, another memory forced itself to be acknowledged. This time it revealed he'd been in this bed with a Japanese woman, having sex with her. What the fuck? Just why on earth was he being bombarded with such images? He knew he could never cheat on the woman he loved. Never! God, this was becoming even more unbearable. Just what the hell was happening to him? "Naomi!" he yelled out in anguish. A few moments later she entered the room and rushed over to his side. "Mulder, I've been waiting for you to wake up. Are you all right?" she asked, concerned, noticing the state he was in. "No, I'm not all right," he replied miserably, wiping the tears from evidence. "I'm very far from all right." Not even aware that lies were now pouring out of her mouth, she explained to him that having shown him around her place, he'd then asked her to direct him to the bathroom. Then, realizing time had passed and he still hadn't returned, how she'd gone looking for him, only to discover he'd collapsed at the top of the stairs, so she'd somehow managed to drag him along the landing and into the bedroom. "I've no idea what could have caused you to pass out like that," she said, a troubled look on her face. "But I checked your pulse and everything seemed to be fine, so I decided it was best to just let you lie here until you came round." Feeling annoyed with herself, she added, "I should have stayed with you. I'm sorry. Did you have a bad dream?" A bad dream? Now that was the understatement of the century. "Several, in fact," he stammered. Unable to describe the explicit details of the erotic one he'd found himself in, Mulder just said, "One involved you and me together in this bed." He looked right at her, trying to read anything from her reaction that may suggest this act, as appalling as it seemed, had actually taken place. Just like the other dreams had been lost memories, one of which was far too terrible to contemplate right now, it had been far too real to dismiss the possibility that this event had also been one. "Oh!" she exclaimed with a nervous giggle, rather embarrassed by what he'd just said. "I'm flattered, really, that you could have those kinds of feelings for me." She couldn't admit to the fact. Should he ever actually pluck up the courage to ask her, she wouldn't hesitate to sleep with him. Of course, in reality, she completely lost herself in Mulder, but remained ignorant of the fact. This was because the spirit of Kuchisaki was refusing to allow the memories of what had actually taken place the night before to enter her mind. Those hours spent in wild abandoned passion had been for her pleasure only, not the vessel she'd chosen to inhabit. Mulder didn't return the smile, feeling uncomfortable that she'd taken his words the wrong way. He began, unsure as to how he should approach this without upsetting her. "I do like you, Naomi, but not like that." Noticing her crestfallen look, he continued, "I'm sorry, but I love Scully, and so could never be with you in that way." He apologized. "Then why tell me you had a dream like that?" she asked, confused, and hurt that he could let his imagination conjure up such things, then refused to admit he had any passion for her whatsoever. It just didn't make any sense. "I don't know why," he admitted, wishing he hadn't said anything now. "The others were memories from my past. I just thought—" "That we made love in my bed? I think I'd have remembered something like that," she said, believing that if they had actually spent the night together, it wasn't something she was likely to overlook. "I'm sorry, just forget it," he told her, tears evident in his eyes. "It's completely ridiculous." Alarmed by the obvious distress he was in, Naomi knelt down on the floor so she was level with him, and reached over, gathering his trembling body into her arms, allowing him to rest his head on her shoulder. "Tell me about the memories that came to you," she said softly, rocking him gently. Maybe once he got those out into the open, she could help him to understand why they'd been present in his dreams. Her warmth and tenderness was beginning to calm him a little, so taking a deep breath, Mulder began to explain everything he could remember about what he'd discovered, about the X-Files, the government conspiracies, the aliens' plans for colonization, and the hybrid program. Unable to stop, he then found himself blurting out about how he'd been responsible for his sister's abduction all along. Speaking this out loud to someone made it all the more substantial now, no matter how much he still wanted to deny it. Feeling so overwhelmed by his terrible confession, he began to cry again, this time holding on to Naomi for support. "Shh, it's okay, Mulder," her voice soothed gently. However, her expression revealed a completely different guise. "Maybe that's why you became so obsessed with finding her, because you harbored this painful secret?" Delighted to hear him let out a ragged gasp in response to her, Kuchisaki continued with her explanations in a comforting tone. "At least you know now why you were driven to search for your sister, so much so that nothing else mattered. It was because of all that hidden guilt buried deep inside your subconsciousness that you had refused to accept was there." Suddenly Mulder understood everything now and began to weep wholeheartedly. "Oh, God!" he cried, choking on his sobs. I told him to take her. I didn't want to go. I was so scared at the time." "It's all right. Let it out," she said, stroking his hair whilst at the same time loving every moment of his grief. "Sam! Oh, God! Can you ever forgive me?" he cried, breaking down in Naomi's arms. "Of course she will," she said, continuing to rock him gently, while Kuchisaki's smile remained very much in evidence. At some point in time his sobbing finally ceased, although he wasn't sure exactly when that had occurred. Pulling himself gently out of Naomi's arms, he looked up at her with eyes now red from crying. "Thank you," he murmured, "for being here." Then his partner came to mind, and in a slight panic he added, "I can't ever tell Scully any of this. She wouldn't understand." He paused, closing his eyes briefly. "And who could blame her?" he added sadly. "That's okay," Naomi replied softly. Even though the experience had been rather traumatic, she couldn't help appreciating that he'd chosen to open up to her with such devastating news. "I mean, thank you for listening," he said solemnly. "If I'd had to lock it all away and carry on, knowing what I know to be the truth now, it would have probably driven me insane." "Glad I could be of help," she smiled. The kiss that followed was completely unexpected, and he couldn't even be sure who'd instigated it first. The taste of it was so sweet, like orange blossoms, and for a moment he let it continue. Then suddenly he pulled away, ashamed that he'd acted in such a way. "I'm sorry, Naomi," he apologized. "I can't do this. Even though I told you that painful secret, and not her, I'm still very much in love with Scully, and she's the only woman I want to share the rest of my life with." As he spoke those words, the tears welled up, because he knew, God forbid, if she ever did find out what he'd done, she would probably leave him in an instant. "I understand," she replied, but continued gazing into his eyes. At first this made him feel rather uncomfortable. Then it was almost like a switch had been flicked inside as the puppet master returned for another performance. Grabbing her by the hair, he lunged forward, kissing her passionately, his tongue exploring every inch of her mouth. With arms locked around her tightly in his vice-like grip, he yanked her up onto the bed, rolling her over so that she was now beneath him.
"You got it!"
Kuchisaki gasped, realizing they were his eyes that were now burning deeply into hers.
"Make love to me!"
Mulder obeyed, unable to resist the spell he was under, and the dance of infatuation between the two former lovers began again, with Naomi and himself being forced to play their roles. When it was finally over, she lay curled up beside him under the bedcovers, watching him sleep. Gazing at Mulder's slender neck, she reached up to touch the fluttering pulse, feeling the warmth of his skin as she did so. She shuddered excitedly, wondering just how wonderful it would be to watch his life force slowly ebb away, to observe every beautifully gruesome moment while his blood soaked into Naomi's silken sheets. Oh, yes, Kuchisaki thought eagerly. Now she was more than ready for the next part of her little game plan. Raising herself up on one elbow, she reached under the pillow and retrieved the items she'd left there. "Oh, Yukayo," she breathed softly, gently running one finger down the serrated edge of the kitchen knife, being careful not to cut herself on its sharp blade. "Much as I have enjoyed our precious moments together." She paused, then leaning over Mulder's sleeping form, placed the knife against his throat, whilst whispering into his ear, her voice now dripping with venom. "But alas, my beloved, I feel it's time to bring this part of our story to an end, don't you?"